Good morning. My name is Scott Lancer, and I'm the director of ABR, the Associates for Biblical Research, an organization that's been involved in active archaeological fieldwork and research for over 50 years. I'm so pleased that you've come today as we announce and share about a recent and most extraordinary discovery. I would like to welcome all the members of the press here today, those gathered in this beautiful space, and those joining us virtually. Thank you for carving out room in your busy schedules to participate with us on this very special day. I welcome our friends from TBS, the Bible Seminary, who worked with great energy to make today a reality. Thank you for being here and for your tireless efforts in coordinating and communicating all aspects of today's press conference. Welcome to the members of the MEDS team, the Mount Ebal Dump Salvage Project team. Your work under the leadership of Dr. Scott Stripling will be honored here today. Thank you for joining us. We welcome the members of the ABR Board of Directors and members of the ABR staff who are joining us virtually today. Your leadership and vision have made this day possible. And finally, I wish to recognize David Capes, the director of the Lanier Theological Library, and his staff, who have invited all of us into this most beautiful place. Thank you for your gracious and kind welcome. We are so very grateful. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank all of you for being here today. I trust that the presentation and discussion this morning will be of great benefit and inspiration for all of us.
On behalf of Mark and Becky Lanier and the Lanier Library Foundation, we want to welcome you to the Lanier Theological Library. I am David Capes. I am privileged to be the director of the library, and many of our staff are here today and will be around to assist you and make you feel welcome. It is a welcoming place. It's my privilege to introduce Dr. Scott Stripling, who serves as provost and director of the Archaeology Institute at the Bible Seminary in Katy, Texas, located just a little bit west of downtown Houston. Stripling is the Director of Excavations for the Associates for Biblical Research at Ancient Shiloh. Previously, he directed the excavation at Khirbet El Maqader, served as field supervisor at Tal El Hammam in Jordan, and as the supervisor of the Temple Mount sifting project in Jerusalem. He also directed the Mount Ebal, a dump salvage operation in December 2019 and January 2020. Stripling did his graduate studies at the University of Texas, an MA, Assemblies of God Theological Seminary, an MA, and his PhD at Veritas International University. Stripling serves as vice president of the board of directors of Near East Archaeological Society and is published widely in peer-reviewed journals, magazines, and books. He's a popular speaker at churches and conferences around the world. He has been a source for news organizations as diverse as the New York Times and Fox News. And he's been interviewed for programs and documentaries on cable networks such as the History Channel and the Discovery Channel. His passion is to connect the material culture of the Holy Land, the Levant, and other areas with the biblical text. Scott and Janet, probably the most important thing about Scott that you need to know is that Scott and Janet, his wife, have been married 39 years. They have 4 grown children and 4 not yet grown grandchildren, I suppose. Some of Scott Stripling's handiwork is on display even now at the museum exhibit entitled Joshua, Judges, and Jesus at the campus of the Bible Seminary in Katy, Texas. He serves as the director of that exhibit, which will be in Houston until the end of 2022. Dr. Stripling, welcome. Glad that you're here today.
Thank you, David. Blessings.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott Lancer. Thank you, David Capes, and appreciate Mark and Becky Lanier and David and Kathy Capes and my staff and our president from the Bible Seminary, Dr. Lewis, being here. and my MEDS team members and all those who are watching online and literally around the world. I know we have countless countries who are tuned in, so to various media outlets, thank you for being here. We want to share some exciting news with you today. John F. Kennedy once said that failure is an orphan, but success has many fathers. And today there are many fathers, if you will, to acknowledge those who had a part of the success of the Mount Ebal dump salvage project back in December 2019, just before the world turned upside down. We had hoped to make this announcement much sooner, but with the worldwide health crisis, I was not able to come and go in Israel normally as I would, and so we weren't able to do all the testing that we needed to do, and so it's been more of a protracted process, but that now brings us to the point today that we are able to share some very, very good news with you. And so I would like to acknowledge, first of all, the late Professor Adam Zertal, who excavated at Mount Ebal from 1982 to 1989 and uncovered two amazing altars, which I will show you in a moment. The members of my ABR team that are here today, Director Scott Lancer, online Henry Smith, Abigail Levitt, pardon me, Frankie Snyder, who actually recovered the tablet. It was in her tray that the tablet we're going to discuss this morning, and Frankie's our small finds expert and was our most trained volunteer in this, and so providentially this ended up in her tray. Steve Rudd, who is present today. Steve was the engineer who built our wet sifting station that enabled us with this new technology to recover this tablet. Countless volunteers, donors, people who contributed in myriad ways. Thanks to each one of you. Our TBS team, Dr. Lewis, Jordan McClinton, Gary Uri, online, Jacob Figueroa, and Sherry Dwyer. And I would in particular like to thank those who are physically present today who are part of the MEDS project. And again, MEDS stands for the Mount Ebal Dump Salvage Project. And, or as some would say, you guys should be on meds for doing this. But I have several of the team that are actually here. And so Steve and Sherry and Jordan and Gary, if you four would stand, please. And thank you for your good work as part of the MEDS team. Online, I have a number of members of our Israeli team. First of all, I'd like to say a word about Aaron Lipkin. It was Aaron and I who originally dreamed or brainstormed this idea on the last day of the Shiloh excavation in 2019. And it was going to take someone on that end to logistically help pull things off, to relocate the dump material and just do so many logistical things. And so Aaron and I dreamed about this, and so it was that initial collaboration that was key to bringing this to fruition. So thank you, Aaron. Working with him, Boaz Vinareb and Shuki Levine also worked tirelessly behind the scenes. Zvi Konisberg helped me in myriad ways also, including couriering the tablet twice to Prague for the high-tech tomographic scanning that I'm going to explain today that enabled this to happen. So thank you, Zvi, who actually worked with Professor Zertal back in the 1980s. Thank you for your contribution. My colleagues, Peter Gert van der Veen from Johannes Gutenberg Universität in Mainz, Germany, and Gershon Galil from Haifa University, who are the epigraphers or paleographers that you're going to hear from a little bit later, and Daniel Vavrik from Prague, along with his colleagues that are part of our collaborative publication team. Thank you. This encompasses several continents. We have Europe, we have Asia, we have North America, all part of this collaborative process. We do have a scientific, academic, peer-reviewed paper that we are nearing completion of, and we hope to have out in the next couple of months, and then it will take a little bit longer to go through the publication process. So hopefully by late summer, you will know everything that we know about the tablet. To remind you or to orient you, what we know about Mount Ebal comes from the Bible. So we know that at the end of Joshua 8, after a victory at a site called Ai, which I happen to know quite a bit about, having excavated there for many years, the text says that the Israelites went north and they had a covenant renewal ceremony with Mount Gerizim on one side and Mount Ebal on the other, of course with ancient Shechem, Tel Balat in the middle. And then Joshua 8:30 says that Joshua built an altar on Mount Ebal, which was the mountain of the curse. And of course, this comes into play because when Adam Zertal found these altars, this had a profound impact on him, and it was from that discarded material that we, using a wet sifting technology, were able to recover a lot of material that team had missed, even though they were quite thorough in their work. And what happened on the fateful day was that as we dry sifted the material again, and then from that soil we did flotation to get seeds, which we can then test and understand what was happening there, along with additional faunal material, that is bone material, to help us understand the sacrificial system that was taking place, and hopefully to extract collagen for additional carbon dating. Once it's dry sifted, then we wash the matrix. This was actually pioneered by James Starkey at Lachish back in the 1930s. And Starkey was so far ahead of his time that when he finished, everybody sort of forgot about it, or no one continued to do what Starkey had done. And so in recent times, the Temple Mount Sifting Project has reintroduced this, and it was that wet sifting or washing technology that enabled us to see what normally you cannot see with the naked eye. And once it went through the washing process and Frankie identified it, I immediately recognized what we had. We call this a defixio, or a cursed tablet, because many of these are known. We know what they are. Frankie recognized it, I recognized it, and Abigail Levitt, who was the assistant director there with me, we all knew that we had a cursed tablet from the site of the curse mentioned in the Bible, so this was terribly exciting. We could see there were glyptic markings on the outside, but of course we didn't know if we would be able to recover those markings. My first thought was that one can't scan through lead. When they give you x-rays, you go to the doctor, they always put this lead on you, and I'm thinking, how are we ever going to be able to scan through this? But we ultimately were able to find a lab in Prague that had expertise. Thousands of scans were done on the tablet in 2 different settings, so that then with extensive post-processing of those images, we were finally able to begin to see letters emerge. Now, very early on, we could see what we were sure was an aleph, an ox head that was morphing into an aleph, which is an indication of a very, very early script. Then we began to see other letters as well, and we began to formulate words, and became quite exciting. At that same time, I had started the process of having the lead itself analyzed. And so we had portions of the tablet that had broken off in the process, and so we had that lead analyzed in a lab at Hebrew University by the renowned professor Naama Yahalom Mak. And Professor Mak recently completed that analysis, and her report is that the metallurgy is clear. There is a consistency with ore from an area in Greece known as Lavrion. Now, from these mines in Greece, we know many lead tablets and other lead objects from the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age that come from those mines. And so this reinforced what we had already determined from the archaeological context. Adam Zertal was clear that this site was founded in the late Bronze II period, say from 1400 to 1200 BC in general terms, and continued on into the Iron Age 1 period around 1150. So the archaeological context strongly suggested an early date, even though the tablets themselves are more typical in later time periods. So we were eager to find out the metallurgy analysis and also the epigraphic and paleographical analysis. So Professor Yahalom Mak's conclusion is that this is very consistent with what one would expect from a tablet from the late Bronze Age. Now, friends, this means that you're dealing with something that is older than any Hebrew script that has ever been published, certainly from the nation of Israel, by at least 200 years. And I'm going to show you the translation of that script in just a moment, and a portion of the actual script. We will not be able to show you the entire thing today because we're still in process of publication. So the narrative then played out in this way, and I'll show you the first images. So Jordan, if you can help me. This is the site. It's called El Burnat. It's on the second step on the backside of Mount Ebal. And here is what Zertal discovered. A 2 by 2 meter round altar, and on top of that, a rectangular altar, which is about 9 by 7 meters roughly, plus a ramp on the west side. So here is the altar area, area A, and then a structure that he identified as a classic Israelite four-room house here in area B. Perhaps it was that, perhaps it was something else. But this area right here is about 1 acre in size, or about 3.8 dunams. It is a foot-shaped enclosure, and it is inside or encased by a larger foot-shaped enclosure. Zertal found a series of these footprint-shaped enclosures going up the Jordan Valley, this being the last one. This was of particular interest because of the biblical reference that Joshua had built an altar on Mount Ebal, and then you found what was clearly a cultic site from that time period on Mount Ebal. Now, like all digs, when they excavated and sifted their material, then they left large dump piles. With our new process, having gone back and checked old dump piles from the 1980s, we knew that they were full of scarabs, bula, and other glyptic material. And so it was not a shock to us that we did recover something of this importance. Now, the east dump is where they dumped their material from the altar. So we tracked, because we had some material. Overall, about 30% of the dump is what we were able to process. And some from the east dump, about 75% from the east dump, and about 25% from the west dump. And we tracked which came from which dump, because we knew that the altar material had all gone into the east dump, according to Zertal's notes. So this is what the site itself looks like. The material was relocated to a nearby site at Shave Shomron, where we were able to then build a provisional station. A building had burned down the previous year, so there was a slab that was available. So on that slab, we constructed our dry sifting and wet sifting stations, and this is where the job was done. Now, the tablet itself, this is a photo that some of you have become familiar with. We've already released this to the media, and you can see that it is only 2 by 2 centimeters in size, and you have 4 surfaces. You have the outer surface A, outer surface B, as if it were unfolded. We were not able to unfold this. When in our lab, with the help of one of Israel's greatest conservators, Orna Cohen, we were unable to unfold it without causing damage. So our hope was that we would be able to tomographically scan it, which we were. In addition to the 2 outer surfaces, you also have 2 inner surfaces, which we have now been able to read. And in the next sign, you will see the translation of this 40-letter inscription. On the inside of the tablet, we recovered 40 Hebrew letters, and this is in a script that we would call Proto-alphabetic script. Sometimes if it's from the Sinai, it's referred to as Proto-Sinaitic, or sometimes folks would refer to this as Proto-Canaanite. We will call it Proto-alphabetic script. 11 of these letters are alephs, the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet, and they are all the archaic form. This is older than Paleo-Hebrew. This predates Paleo-Hebrew. And so you have an ox head that is morphing into an aleph. And in the 23-word English translation, which you're looking at, the word curse, arur in Hebrew, appears 10 times. And, ladies and gentlemen, the name Yahweh appears twice. We now have the name Yahweh, the biblical God of Israel, in an inscription dating from LB2, which is earlier than many skeptics would argue that the Bible existed or that there was even the ability to write down a sacred text. So the implications of this are enormous, and they will echo on and reverberate for many, many years to come. Once we publish our work, then other scholars can have at it, and maybe they're going to disagree with some of the wording, but I don't think anyone will be able to argue that this is not an archaic Hebrew proto-alphabetic text from the Late Bronze II period, and this is our reading of it at this point. We also have letters on the outside of the text, which I'm not able to tell you about today, which we're still in process and working with these. So you're going to hear several things more today that nobody has heard yet, and then when the article comes out, you'll get the full actual text of this. So here is our translation. We would call this a chiastic parallelism. You see, it helps to have a degree in English also. This is a literary structure, and you read this in the Psalms very often. And so what it reads is this: Cursed, cursed, cursed. Cursed by the God Yahweh. You will die cursed. Cursed you will surely die. Cursed by Yahweh. Cursed, cursed, cursed. This is what we believe is most likely a self-imprecatory curse, which was the point of the Deuteronomy 27-28 covenant. Point 4 of a late Bronze Age covenant is a self-binding or self-imprecatory oath that one brings upon oneself. So if you go back and read those portions of the biblical text, you are saying, I accept the blessings that come by keeping the covenant, and I accept the curses that will come upon me if I break this covenant. Now, it's possible that this may be titular, referring to the entire nation, or perhaps this was an individual who was enacting or confirming his participation in the covenant renewal ceremony. And so in the last sign, you will see the name of God itself. And this is in the Proto-alphabetic script. And at this point, the language has not yet standardized. So it can be read from left to right, top to bottom. It can be as the ox plows, like left to right, and then coming back right to left the other way. But we are very confident of this, and we have it twice. The Yod on the left, the He in the middle, which is in this time period, this pre-Paleo-Hebrew script, has sort of what looks like a man with his arms raised. This is the Hebrew He, and then the Vav. So you have the divine name of God. We have a Pithos, what's called Pithos B from Kuntilet Ajrud in the Sinai, which has the name Yahweh on it, dating to about the 8th century, and it's the famous Yahweh and his Asherah inscription. You have the Soleb hieroglyph from Nubia, down in Egypt, which was part of Egypt during the 18th Egyptian dynasty, and there you have the famous land of the Shasu of Yahweh inscription. And now we have in the land of Israel itself, dating to the late Bronze II period, 14th or 13th century, somewhere beginning at maybe the LB1B, LB2A horizon, all the way down to the end of LB, still working with the exact placement of that time. You now have the divine name of God at a covenant site in Israel. And so this is of extreme importance, and I know many of you are going to be excited about this particular finding. And so at this point, I want to introduce our epigraphers to you, Peter Gert van der Veen and Gershon Galil, and they're going to speak to you for a few minutes about the actual inscription. And so, Peter, we're going to ask you please to go first, and then Gershon, we'll ask you to speak.
Yes, well, glad to meet you, everybody here from Germany. We are quite happy to introduce this lead tablet to you, which, as you may gather from that what Scott Stripling has already mentioned, is rather unique in that it refers to the divine name Yahweh in a late Bronze Age inscription. It is, as we said before, it's impossible at the moment to actually unfold it. So what we have is two other sides, the front side, the back side, and as we discovered, an inscription inside. And we could read this inscription with the help of tomographic scans that were done by the University of Prague team. And these allowed us to read this longer inscription on the inside of the tablet. As was already noted, there are also letters on the outside which relate to the text inside, but we're not going to cover these as this is still work in process. Strikingly, the inscription on the inside revealed very ancient letters that find close parallels in other Bronze Age proto-alphabetic inscriptions from the first half and the second half of the second millennium BC. It so happened that we have a cursed inscription, maybe we call it a legal inscription, with what appears to be a legal verdict spoken about a still unknown person We don't know exactly to whom it is addressed. Perhaps it's also addressed to a group of people who is or who are apparently addressed in the inscription. The inscription is clearly of ancient Israelite origin, as it refers to the main Israelite deity, and as it reads a curse formula that finds very good literary parallels in the Hebrew Bible.
Thank you, Peter.
Now, I still have something to add.
Yes, please. Please.
As you noticed, it's written on lead, and that is not quite so common. And actually, as we thought ourselves, this is not common at all, and it came basically as a big surprise. As said, the inscription is found on a folded lead strip from Mount Ebal that was abandoned sometime during the 12th century BC. And this came as a big surprise indeed, as lead inscriptions are far better known from the first millennium BC and onwards. We were even more astonished when we discovered that the inscription contained a legal verdict, let alone an Israelite one. Legal inscriptions, let alone curses written on lead, are mostly from the Roman and medieval period. In our study of the tablet, however, we discovered that inscribed lead strips were in use in the Eastern Mediterranean and ancient Near East during the earlier first millennium BC. The oldest known inscribed lead strip, however, was found in 1937 at the capital of the Imperial Hittite Empire in Central Anatolia, modern Turkey, and dates to the 14th or 13th century BC, so exactly the time when our lead tablet was inscribed. Therefore, inscribed lead strips were in use during the right period of time. Moreover, Israeli archaeologists recently found that inscribed lead ingots were imported from the Aegean when they discovered a ship's cargo on a site on the coast to the south of Haifa. This port indeed dates from the same period as our lead inscription, whose lead, as has been analyzed, also, as we already heard, derived from the Aegean. To date, no legal inscriptions on lead are known from this period. We have execration texts on pottery that are known from Egypt and Canaan. None of these are to date of Israelite origin, except for our tablet. And this is why we really can say for sure this tablet is unique, as it dates from the early period of the Israelites in Canaan. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Gershon.
Yes. Dear Scott, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Scott, for inviting me to join the team, and thank you, Peter, for your good friendship. As you see, the Ebal inscription is absolutely the most important inscription ever found in Israel. And since my colleagues have referred to many aspects, I will refer to a few terms which are mentioned in the inscription. First of all, the name of the god, which Scott already pointed out, that it is mentioned indeed in the Egyptian inscriptions, but in Hebrew epigraphy, it is only mentioned 500 years later. Yes, in the Megillat Ajrut. So this is very important. Moreover, the appearance of the name of Yahweh, the name of the well-known national God of Israel, is a clear indication that the Ebal inscription was written by Israelites and in Hebrew at the end of the LB. So it is clearly the most ancient Hebrews ever found, and it is probably touching upon the early history of Israel, and preceded many centuries other inscriptions. I I want to point out an important point that was not mentioned enough before. As Scott and Peter told you, we don't reveal here all our secrets. We are speaking about the inner inscription. But this text is not just a curse. It is actually a legal text. Not just a legal warning. It is a kind of sentence. The cursed defendant is found guilty and sentenced to death for his sins. So it is a legal document, and it contains an envelope and an inner document, similar to other ancient Near Eastern legal economic inscription, which include also an envelope and an inner text. And usually, the text in the inner table, and this is a small hint for you, is rewritten verbatim on the envelope. It is not clear what was the sins of this Arur, but for many sins in Deuteronomy 27, there is a death sentence in Exodus and Leviticus. And now it is clear that the Israelites know to write text, and the scribe who wrote this important text, believe me, he could write every chapter in the Bible. So this is why no one can claim that the Bible was written in later period, in the Persian period, in the Hellenistic period, or who knows. Because they were able to write it very, very early. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Gershon. We are going to open up for questions from those who are present and those who are online, and we will alternate between the two. And so we'll begin, pardon me, with someone who is present. So if you have a question, would you please identify yourself and state your question, and then I'll repeat it, and I'll either answer it, I'll defer it to one of my colleagues. Yes, Jim?
Jim Scudder with In Grace on TBN. Would the inscription have been embossed or scratched into the lead? Do you know?
Okay, the question was, would the inscription have been embossed or scratched into the lead? Our understanding is that most likely an iron pen or stylus was used to inscribe it in lead. And for those of you who are Bible readers, see the oldest book in the Bible, Job 19:24, for a reference to inscribing with an iron pen on lead. Okay, good question. And do we have an online question?
Yes. Eliyahu from the Jerusalem Post says, does this change the timeline for the Exodus when it was believed to happen?
Okay, so this question comes from Eliyahu at the Jerusalem Post. Does this change our timeline for understanding when the Exodus would have happened? Well, he has cut to the chase with that question. I think it does indicate that the Exodus and conquest would have had to have occurred at an earlier date. And the last thing Gershon said was very important. One can no longer argue with a straight face that the biblical text was not written until the Persian period or the Hellenistic period, as many higher critics have done, when here we do clearly have the ability to write the entire text at a much, much earlier date. Okay, do we have another question, Stu?
Stuart Peck of Appian Media. So you said you've excavated or you've sifted through about 30% of the... Do you have plans to do more of that? And what, if you do, what do you expect to find?
Okay, this is Stuart Peck from Appian Media. Yes, we did excavate through about 30% of the material, Stu, and we would love to excavate through more, and hopefully we will have generous donors that will enable us to do that. This is all, of course, a very expensive process, and we would love to do more work on Mount Ebal in the future. This was the test, if you will, to find out what was in the dump piles. And we, the day that Aaron Lipkin and I, last day we went to look at the site to inaugurate the project, as we pulled away and stopped and looked back, it had rained a little earlier and there was a rainbow over the altar. And instead of a pot of gold, we found a pot of lead at the end of the rainbow. Okay, we have another online question.
Yes, Gideon is wondering, what is the methodology with which the significance of the interpreted writing was established? Was it multi-wavelength scanning?
Okay, the question is, what methodology was used to recover the text? Was it multi-wavelength scanning? And Peter, can I defer that one to you?
I think the best answer would really need to come from them, how the method works. What they gave us or sent us were, in fact, the scans showing exactly the level on which these letters are to be found in the scans. And what happens to be the case is that all the letters that we see on the inside all belong to the same level. Yeah, so we can actually say, yes, they must be all on the surface of the inside tablets on the same level. It really it made every sense. Yes.
Excellent. And I would refer you to the press release. At the bottom of the press release, in multiple languages, you have contact people. So Daniel Vavrik is listed there, and you can get more detail from Daniel. In Czech, you can reach out to Daniel. For German, reach out to Peter. For Hebrew, reach out to Gershon. And for English or Spanish, you can reach out to me, and our contact information is on the press release. Do we have another live question? Yes.
Yes, David Kowalski, pastor at the Cross Fellowship. Question. So you established that the condition is such that it's not open right now. Is there a possibility in the future that tablet will be able to be opened and separated to be examined, the internal structure of it?
The question was, is it possible in the future to be able to open the tablet so that we can see more? All things are possible. I mean, it's sort of good that maybe Adam Zertal's team did not find this tablet because they didn't have the technology then to do what we did now with the tomographic scans and the wet sifting. In the future, who knows what will be possible? It seems difficult because it's a brittle material, but perhaps there is a way to soften the lead through heating it, carefully heating it, and then maybe it becomes malleable. But at this point, that's over my pay grade. Yes. Do we have another live question? Yes.
Jeff Grain with the Patterns of Evidence Foundation. Going back to the earlier question, dating the Exodus, can you expand just a little bit more on that and how this tablet could impact that dating?
The question from Jeff Green from the Patterns of Evidence Foundation was, can I expand a bit more on how this impacts the dating of the Exodus? That's a lengthy topic. There's a new book by Zondervan called 5 Views on the Exodus, and I wrote chapter 1. So I would refer people to that to understand the larger context of all the various views and how this could impact it. This is probably beyond the scope of what I could delve much deeper into today, other than that this tips the scale in favor of an earlier date and does not help the arguments of those who favor a later date. Yes, sir. And do we have another online question?
We do. Eliyahu would like to know who wrote the tablet, and does it confirm Dr. Zertal's theory that this was indeed the altar of Joshua?
Gershon, were you able to hear the question, or shall I repeat it for you?
No, repeat the question, please.
Who wrote the tablet, and does this help confirm Professor Zertal's hypothesis?
Well, it is clear that the person who wrote it was a genius. Mm-hmm. He was a real genius, and when you will see the final article, you will understand what I mean genius. So he was not only a scribe; he was a theologian. He was a leader, and it is clear that it was found and even left near this cultic site called Mount Ebal, and no one argues today. I think that it was a cultic place, and you know that it was. We have an early phase and a later phase. And the interesting thing about the story about Joshua's altar is the fact that you can read about it in my new book, God's Love Story. The Deuteronomy, who wrote his Deuteronomistic composition in the Babylonian exile, he is speaking about the altar of Joshua. How come? We are speaking about a gap of some 700 years. What was it so important to to preach to the exiles about Joshua's altar. If it is fiction, if it is nonsense, if it was written in the Persian period.
Okay. Thank you,
My
Gershon.
conclusion is just only one sentence. My conclusion is that the story about the Joshua's altar was an historical fact, well known and when commemorated in the national memory. And the Deuteronomist has his reason. You can read it in my book, but it was a true story. And I'm not referring now to the big monument on Mount Ebal, which is a little later. But as Scott can tell you, there is also an earlier an altar, a very, very simple altar with a 4 rooms house near it. So, in my opinion, it comes from this early phase, because the paleography, like Peter told you before, the letters are very archaic, and the main important thing that we don't have too late forms. Because the question is not if we have archaic, if we have later forms. And we don't have later forms, because as all of you know, we also have the Sealand inscription from Babylon, which are dated clearly to around 1500. And we have in our inscription similar letters. So these are not a late form of stances, for example, of the letter Resh, but it already appears in this inscription. So there is surely a connection, and the important fact that this amulet was left on Mount Ebal. This is a very, very important point.
Thank you, Gershon.
Okay.
And as you can tell, we could talk all day about this topic. It's fascinating. John from KSBJ.
Yeah, John Hostler, Hope Media Group, KSBJ. Not by chance, Scott, my chronological Bible reading this morning was Joshua 8 and Joshua 9, so I'm glad to be here. And in it, it said that in front of the people, Joshua wrote a copy of the law of Moses. So what do you anticipate finding in this area?
So the question was, what do we anticipate finding? Because the biblical text, which John had read this morning, indicates that Joshua wrote the words of the law there at Mount Ebal. Adam Zertal recovered a significant amount of plaster during the excavation. Now, the round altar is at the perfect geometric center of the rectangular altar. The later altar is venerating that earlier one, which is what we believe is Joshua's altar. The technology did not exist in the 1980s to be able to, for example, with infrared and ultraviolet lighting, to be able to examine that plaster. That is about to be done, okay? That is in the works. And so that plaster was saved. It is going to be, we may even be a part of that examination process, since we have that special type of lighting. So it's terribly exciting. You have a tradition of writing on Mount Ebal from the late Bronze Age. Now we have evidence that it happened. We have plaster from there with flat surfaces on it. So stay tuned for more details on that. It's a great question.
May I refer to it also?
Of course.
Question.
Yes.
If you're asking if this story is possible, the answer is absolutely yes. This amulet doesn't prove it, but now we know that it is possible. It is possible that they wrote very early, and chapters in the Bible, maybe that they were written not in the 10th century or in the 11th century, maybe even earlier, like the Song of Deborah or the Song of Hannah or other texts, which were not only oral traditions, but it is possible that it is not proven from this amulet, but the possibility is now. And the answer, if it is possible, is positive.
Our friends from the other side of the academic aisle have sort of disparagingly spoken of us who believe that the Bible was written at a very early date, because that was not possible. There was no alphabetic script with which to write it, and clearly this flies in the face of that. Do you have another online question?
We do. Claire from the Houston Chronicle would like to ask, just to clarify, how would you word the fact that it predates the Bible and by how much?
Claire from the Houston Chronicle, her question is, how would we clarify that this text predates the Bible and by how much? We don't think that it does predate the Bible. We think that it coincides concomitantly with the inscription of the biblical text. So it's happening at the same time that the Pentateuch is being written is when this text would have been written, in somewhere in what we would call the Late Bronze II period. It's a great question. And I think, yes, Mike.
Yeah, Mike Mazzarella, Sunlight Broadcasting Network, Jimmy Stryker Bible College. The question I have comes from your textbook, book that we're using, your textbook, Trial and Truth. And in it, it was extremely important to you, and I think it is to ABR, the synchronization between biblical text and historic proof. And I think this situation, I just want to bring out how powerful is what you're talking about today in supporting our faith in the Bible.
Mike's question is, in light of what I wrote in my text, and thank you for plugging my book, by the way, The Trial and the Truth, how important is this synchronization? Just how grave is it? On a scale of 1 to 10, this is a 10. It doesn't get any bigger than this. We talk about verisimilitude, or a consistency between what we read in a text and what we find in the material culture, that correlation. It doesn't get any better than this. This is what you, if the text were true, this is what you would anticipate finding, and indeed it is what we found. So, good question. Do we have another online?
Yes. Johannes Stoms is curious, is it already possible to see a complete drawing of the original text, or is this a work in progress?
Johannes, that's a great question. And Peter, I would defer it to you, but it's a yes or no question, so I'll just say, no, it is not yet possible to see the complete one. Hopefully by late summer, one would be able to. Yes, Doug from Gesher Media.
Yeah, Doug from Gesher Media. This is more anthropological than archaeological. But if you have someone making a folded lead with a curse on it, would it be common for them to open it again to remember what was there, or simply to make it one time, close it, and bury it?
Would it be common to reopen the text to affirm it, or is it common to close it and never open it again? It is definitely not to be reopened. Once it is inscribed, it becomes legal, as both Peter and Gershon said, and the fact that it's sealed, it becomes permanent. Okay? And again, I would refer you to Jeremiah 17 and to Job 19, in addition to the other parallels that Gershon was citing. Great question.
Yes, and if I can add, maybe they were even frightened to touch it. Because you remember that the people that only take a look at the ark, they were in a great danger, and the person who touches the ark, he is now is dead. So maybe this is the reason why they leave it there on the side, maybe bury it, because it could be dangerous. It's holy, and could be dangerous.
Excellent. Back to online. We have anyone else?
Brian Wendell from the Bible Archaeological Report asks, do you believe this inscription came from the covenant renewal ceremony itself, from Joshua 8, or does it come from a later time that commemorates that event?
Okay, Brian's question is, does the text correlate with the covenant renewal ceremony? I believe the answer is yes. Peter and Gershon, do you concur?
Can you repeat the question?
Does this text coincide possibly with the covenant renewal ceremony enumerated in Joshua 8?
I think it is possible. The text now in Joshua 8 is a late Deuteronomistic formulation, but it doesn't mean that the Deuteronomists don't have an ancient text which he incorporated in his new literary composition. So it is possible, and as I said before, the ceremony on Mount Ebal mentioned in Joshua 8 is a historical fact. How do I know that it is a historical fact? Because if it was not an historical fact, why did the Deuteronomists use it preaching to the exile? Why? Should he invent He was not, I will not say who, he would not start to invent fiction and invention. He referred to a well-known fact, and he is arguing with it. He's arguing with the question, what happened there on Mount Ebal? Does Joshua follow Moses or not? Does he have a separate book of law as mentioned in Joshua 24? The book of the Torah of Joshua, which was written in Shechem, or is it the same? And the interest of the economist was to say that it was the same. And Joshua wrote Moses' law.
And Peter, would you like to speak to it also?
I'm not sure if this was the fact, but there was a ceremony, and the Deuteronomist tried to argue with it.
Thank you. Peter?
Yes, I think it's very plausible that there is a connection between the lead tablet and the covenant renewal. Naturally, as what the inscription says so far does not prove this. But the very fact that Mount Ebal is related to the curse ceremony, and the fact that the lead tablet does refer to curse, makes I think clinches the thing. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And one short note, if I may, one short note, that it is not only a matter of curse. Mm-hmm. It's about the freedom of choice, because you have a freedom of choice to choose life or death, and this is what is written also in Deuteronomy 28. Mm-hmm. It's not about cursing, and it's not a sort of voodoo inscription. No. It's a theological text that point out the negative thing, but at the end we are dealing about freedom of choice.
And to go off of that for a moment, again, back to the formulaic structure of a late Bronze Age curse, point 4, you cannot have a curse without a blessing. So they're inexorably bound together. John, you had mentioned the coincidence of what your reading was this morning. Also, serendipitously or coincidentally, there is a conference in Israel today about the use of lead on ancient materials. Okay, that's as we speak. So a lot of coincidences going on. We just have a few minutes left. We'll try to give very short answers for any others. Anyone present have a question you did not get a chance to ask? Yes, David.
Would the use of lead for a lead tablet been used more by a common person, or would it have been more of a ceremonial circumstance or an upper caste of society?
Was this more prominent, the writing, among an upper class, or was it more egalitarian? We don't know the answer to that for sure. The traditional thought is that you had a more educated class, and that you had high levels of illiteracy, but many of us, and probably the three of us, would push back against that. What's the point of writing all these words of the law so everybody can read them and see them? How can they be binding if people cannot read them? And so the early arguments against high levels of literacy, I think, are pretty weak arguments. Having said that, this particular one could have been written by someone who is a representative of the larger people group, and that certainly would have been scribal and had a skill set, because this is a very skilled person who wrote this. Great question.
Yes, but it was not only written down. Somebody probably read it in front of the people.
Yes, good point.
So somebody read it. It was not only written.
Good point. Anyone else online now?
Yes.
Angela?
Martin Hyde from the University of Marburg, Germany, has asked, since the tablet was found by sifting through earlier digging dump, how much of the dating is based on script and how much on archaeological context?
Okay, that's a great question. Since it was found from out of context, if you will, how much of our dating is based on archaeological context and how much is based on the paleographic, epigraphic analysis? Peter, can you give us a brief response?
Okay, what Gershon and I did was, of course, only look at the inscription, and as we mentioned before, all the letter types appear to very clearly be restricted to anything that we have before the early Iron Age in late Bronze Age and also Middle Bronze Age inscriptions. So it's really proto-alphabetic. It's very early. So what we can say in terms of the date is based on the paleography.
And we don't have, as I said before, we don't have late form stances, which would oblige us to push it down to the first millennium or something like that.
Yeah.
The forms are well known and early forms, and of course the context is obvious.
The archaeological context suggests that it's a late Bronze II date. The epigraphic analysis also suggests that it's a late Bronze date. So it's an equal fold. We've got time for one more question. Anyone else?
I do. I have Ronald Wallenfels wants to know, when you say it is folded and sealed, is there a seal impression per se?
The question is, when we use the term that it was folded and sealed, was there an actual seal that was on it? This is a good question. No, there's not a seal like a boule would be a lump of clay that seals a scroll. No, there's no actual seal on this. I just mean that once the lead cools off, that there's no opening yet. So it's been sealed at that point. And
look at the Neo-Assyrian legal inscription. They look very similar. You have an inner inscription and an envelope. You have many pictures. You look in the British Museum and other places, you will see many pictures of an envelope and an inner inscription. So it's a kind of sealing, but it's in case that we are argue later about the details of the contract, we open it.
Thank you, Gershon. Any final question from anyone present? If not, we want to thank you for being present today. You have the information to follow up with us. We have a series of interviews we're going to be doing in this room after the press conference. And so there's an open space to gather, to fellowship, and there's a tour available of the library. So thank you for coming today.